I want to tell you something nobody who's ever been in a coma will admit out loud. You don't come back all at once. You come back in pieces. A finger first, then a sound, then a smell, then the slow crushing weight of your own body remembering it exists. And somewhere in that fog, before your eyes open, before your throat remembers how to work, your ears wake up. My ears were greeted by the most outrageous sentence I have ever heard. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. That was me, Raymond Holt, 61 years old, retired contractor, a man who built houses with his bare hands for 34 years and nearly died from a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday afternoon while making a grilled cheese sandwich. You can't write that kind of irony. I'd been out for 22 days, 3 weeks where the world kept spinning, and I had absolutely no say in any of it. And trust me, the world took full advantage of my absence. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something about my daughter, Lindsay. I raised that girl alone from the time she was 9 years old. Her mother walked out, and I didn't. I worked double shifts, missed sleep, missed meals, drove her to every school play, every soccer game, every heartbreak at 2 in the morning when some boy wasn't worth her tears. But I sat on that porch with her anyway. I gave that girl everything. So when she walked into that hospital room on the morning I finally opened my eyes, I smiled. Even through the tubes and the fog and the aching bones, I smiled because she was the first face I wanted to see. She stood in the doorway holding a coffee cup, brown hair pulled back, wearing that green jacket I bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. And she looked at me with this expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not relief, not joy, something else, something tight around the eyes, rehearsed. I tried to speak, and it came out as a croak. Linz. She walked in slowly, set her coffee on the bedside table, pulled up a chair. She didn't hug me. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and cleared her throat. Dad, how are you feeling? Like I got hit by a freight train. And then the freight train reversed, I rasped. Come here. Let me look at you. She gave me a stiff smile, leaned in for what I can only describe as the most corporate hug in human history. 2 pats on the shoulder. Done. I told myself she was just nervous, scared. People process fear differently. I let it go. The doctors came in, explained what had happened, the aneurysm, the surgery, the recovery timeline. 6 to 8 weeks before I could go home. Physical therapy, monitoring, rest. I wasn't worried. I had a home to go back to, a house I'd owned for 27 years. A 3-bedroom Craftsman on Delwood Avenue that I'd renovated myself room by room over 2 decades. The crown molding in the living room, my hands, the hardwood floors, my knees, my sweat, my weekends. That house wasn't just property. It was proof that my life had meant something. Lindsay visited 4 more times over the next 3 weeks. Each visit shorter than the last. Each hug slightly more distant. I noticed, but I told myself, she's busy. She has her own life. Brett's family is demanding. You know how it is. I knew how it was. Brett, her husband of 4 years, a man with the handshake of a wet napkin and the confidence of someone whose mother still ironed his shirts at 34 years old. I never disliked Brett exactly. I just recognized him the kind of man who nods when he should speak and disappears when he should stand up. And then there was Norma, Brett's mother. Lord, where do I even begin with Norma? Picture a woman who smiles constantly, but never with her eyes. Who brings casseroles to your home and somehow makes you feel like a guest while she's doing it. Who calls you Raymond honey, in a voice so sweet it'll give you a cavity while she's mentally measuring your living room for new furniture. I'd felt Norma's interest in my house for years. Little comments at Christmas dinner. Raymond, this kitchen would be just gorgeous with an island. Have you ever thought about selling? Brett and I could help you find something more manageable for one person. More manageable for one person? I'd smiled and passed the rolls and filed it away. Now, Here's where the story takes a turn that I still even now have to pause and breathe through before I tell it. It was a Thursday morning, week 5 of my recovery. A nurse named Patricia, God bless that woman, was helping me with my morning physical therapy exercises when Lindsay walked in, no warning, no call ahead. She was wearing the green jacket again. Something told me the green jacket was becoming a bad omen. Dad, I need to talk to you about something about the house. I kept doing my exercises, slowly squeezing the therapy ball. What about it? I'd heard that exhale before. Right before she told me she dented my truck in 2009, and right before she told me she was dropping out of nursing school. That exhale was the sound of something already done that I wasn't going to like. While you were in the coma, Dad, Brett, and I had to make some decisions. Financial decisions. The hospital bills were Lindsay, just her name, just the one word. But the way I said it made Patricia quietly set down her clipboard and find somewhere else to be. There was a power of attorney, Dad. You signed it years ago when you had that knee surgery. Remember? You said if anything ever happened, I know what I signed. We had to use it. The therapy ball in my hand stopped moving. To do what, exactly? She looked at the window, at the floor, at her coffee cup, everywhere except my face. The house has been transferred into Douglas and Norma's name. It was the only way to cover the costs and keep everything stable while you were. I want to tell you I stayed calm. I want to tell you I took a deep breath and responded with the dignity of a man who had lived 6 decades and seen hard times before. But what I actually did was drop the therapy ball. It bounced twice on the linoleum floor, bounced twice, rolled under the bed, and stopped. And for about 15 seconds, that was the only sound in the room. Then I looked at my daughter, the one I raised alone, the one I sacrificed for, the one wearing the jacket I bought with my own hands, and I said very quietly, "Get out, Lindsay, get out." She left, and I stared at the ceiling of that hospital room for 3 hours straight, not moving, not calling anyone, not making a single sound. Because here's what Lindsay didn't know. Here's what Norma didn't know. Here's what not a single one of them knew. While they were signing papers and measuring my kitchen for a new island, there was a second property. A lake house 40 minutes outside of town, left to me by my Uncle Roy 17 years ago, titled under the Holt Family Trust. A trust so old and so quietly maintained that it didn't appear in any standard property search. It didn't appear on my taxes under my personal name. It didn't appear anywhere that Norma's calculating little eyes could have found it. And I hadn't mentioned it to a single soul in 11 years. I picked up my phone. I called Spencer. He answered on the second ring. Ray Holt. Brother, I heard you were in the hospital. Are you okay? Spencer, I said, and my voice was calmer than I expected. I need you to do something for me. I need you to pull the Holt family trust documents, all of them, and I need you to find out exactly what condition my lake house is in. A pause. Ray, what happened? I almost laughed. Almost. While I was asleep, I said slowly, someone forgot that the man who builds houses always has more than one. And then in the voice of a man who had known me for 30 years, he said exactly 4 words. I'll pull the files. And just like that, the game had already begun. They just didn't know it yet. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. They discharged me on a Friday morning, no fanfare, no welcome home balloons, no daughter waiting at the curb with a warm meal and an apology. Just Patricia the nurse. A wheelchair I didn't need but hospital policy required, and a plastic bag containing my wallet, my watch, and the clothes I'd been wearing the day my brain decided to stage a revolt over a grilled cheese sandwich. Spencer picked me up. He pulled up in his old navy blue Buick, the same car he'd been driving since 2019 and refused to replace because, in his words, it still runs, Ray, and things that still run deserve loyalty. Spencer was 64, silver-haired, wore glasses on a chain around his neck like somebody's grandfather, and was quietly one of the sharpest legal minds in the county. He'd been my friend for 30 years before he was ever my attorney. He took one look at me, climbing into that passenger seat, and said, "You look terrible." "Thank you, Spencer. Truly. Your bedside manner is a gift." "I'm serious. You've lost weight." "I wasn't exactly hitting the gym." He handed me a coffee black. 2 sugars. Exactly how I take it without saying another word. And for the first 10 minutes of that drive, we just rode in silence. The kind of silence that only exists between people who've known each other long enough that words aren't always necessary. Then he said, "I pulled the trust documents, and the lake house is yours, Ray. Clean title. The Holt family trust is airtight. Your uncle's attorney was thorough. It never touched your personal estate, never appeared in any joint filing, and the trust has been quietly paying its own property taxes through the account your uncle set up automatically every year, like clockwork." I wrapped both hands around that coffee cup. "So they have no claim on it?" "Zero. None. Not even a shadow of one." I nodded slowly, stared out the window at the highway passing by. Normal people going normal places on a normal Friday, living their normal lives. Meanwhile, I was sitting here, 61 years old, fresh out of a hospital, homeless by my own daughter's signature. "What about the Delwood house?" I asked. "The transfer, is it reversible?" Spencer made a sound, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh, something in between. "That's the interesting part," he said. "The power of attorney you signed back in 2014 for the knee surgery, it had an expiration clause. Standard language. Becomes void if the grantor regains full legal capacity." Meaning? Meaning the moment you woke up in that hospital bed? Ray. The POA died. Anything signed or transferred after that point, he paused for effect, and I could tell he'd been waiting to say this since he pulled the files was signed without legal authority. I turned to look at him. He was smiling just slightly, the way Spencer smiled when he already knew how a case ended. "Spencer, are you telling me they transferred my house illegally?" "I'm telling you that a very compelling argument exists. That they did. Yes. I'm also telling you that argument will be significantly stronger after we've let them settle in. Let them think they've won, and then file at precisely the right moment." I faced forward again. "You want to wait?" "I want to be surgical," he said. "There's a difference. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I need to stop and paint you a picture of the lake house because this is important." The lake house sat on 4 acres off Route 9, about 40 minutes northeast of town. Modest from the outside, cedar siding, stone chimney, a covered porch that ran the full length of the front face and looked out over a private stretch of Callaway Lake. Yes, Callaway Lake, named after a family 2 generations back. The irony of my situation was apparently not lost on the universe. I hadn't been out there in 11 years, not since the summer my Uncle Roy passed, and I drove out alone, sat on that porch for an afternoon, cried exactly once, and then locked the door behind me, because some places hurt too much to visit casually. Spencer pulled up the gravel drive and stopped the car. We both just stared at it for a moment. The cedar siding had weathered to a beautiful silver gray. The porch railing needed work. The lawn had gone wild in the most forgivable way possible. Tall grass, overgrown wildflowers, a chaos that somehow still looked intentional, like the land had just been keeping itself company. "How bad is the inside?" Spencer asked. "I have absolutely no idea," I said, and opened the car door. It wasn't bad. That's the thing about houses that are built right. They hold. The roof was solid. The floors were original pine, dusty but intact. The stone fireplace in the living room was pristine. The kitchen was dated but functional. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a mudroom off the back that opened onto a wooden dock extending 12 feet over the lake. I stood on that dock for a long time. The water was still. The afternoon light was doing something ridiculous and beautiful across the surface. A heron stood at the far bank minding its own business, which I respected enormously. And something happened to me standing there that I hadn't expected. I felt clear. Not happy, I wasn't ready for happy yet, but clear. Like the fog of 3 weeks unconscious and 2 weeks furious had finally settled. And underneath all of it was just a man with a plan and a piece of land and the patience of someone who'd spent 34 years knowing that the best work takes time. I went back inside and called June. Now, June, I need to tell you about June. She lived 3 houses down from my Delwood Avenue home for 19 years. 70 years old, sharp as a tack, grew roses that won county competitions, and saw everything that happened on that street from her front porch, with the dedication of a professional surveillance operative. If something happened on Delwood Avenue, June knew about it before the people it happened to did. She answered on the first ring. "Raymond Holt, I heard you were out. How are you feeling?" "Better, June. Listen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Raymond, I have never been anything other than honest with you in 19 years. "Fair enough. The house. What happened while I was in the hospital?" A pause. The kind of pause that meant she had plenty to say and was just organizing it. "Well," she began, and I could hear her settling into her porch chair. "About a week after you went in, Brett's parents started coming around. At first it was just Norma checking the mail," she said. "Then it was Norma and Douglas together walking the property. Then one afternoon there was a locksmith." "A locksmith? I have photographs," she said simply. I closed my eyes. "June, I didn't know what was happening, Raymond, but I knew something was happening." "So, yes? I have photographs. Dated, time-stamped, the whole thing. Sometimes, and I mean this sincerely, sometimes the most powerful person in any situation is a 70-year-old woman with a porch, a camera phone, and absolutely nowhere else to be." "I could hug you," I told her. "You can hug me when this is over," she said. "Now go do what you need to do." Over the next 3 weeks, I did exactly that. Spencer began quietly assembling the legal case, the expired POA, the post-recovery transfer, June's photographs, the timestamps. He wasn't filing yet, he was building. And while he built, I rebuilt. I hired 2 men from my old crew, retired contractors who owed me favors going back 15 years, and we went to work on the lake house. Not frantically, methodically, the way you work when you know exactly where you're going. New porch railing, fresh exterior stain, deep walnut, beautiful against the cedar. Refinished floors, updated kitchen, a gas fireplace insert for the living room, modern fixtures throughout. I repainted the dock, reinforced its frame, added a railing, and 2 Adirondack chairs at the end facing the water. I want you to understand something. That house had been quiet for 11 years, and in 3 weeks, with my own hands still recovering, still tired, I made it extraordinary. Meanwhile, back on Delwood Avenue, Norma was redecorating my living room. I know this because June sent me pictures. "She replaced your curtains," June reported one evening. "Beige. Can you imagine beige curtains in that beautiful room?" "Breathe, June." I am breathing, and I'm disgusted. 2 different things. She also reported that Norma had hosted a dinner party, that Douglas had started parking in my garage, that Brett and Lindsay had moved into my bedroom, while Norma and Douglas took the guest suite. One big happy family in my house with beige curtains. Good. Let them get comfortable. Comfortable people stop watching their backs. It was on a quiet Wednesday evening, exactly 6 weeks after I'd been discharged, that Spencer called me. I was sitting in one of those Adirondack chairs on the dock, coffee in hand, watching the sun do its evening performance over the water. "Ray," he said, "everything's ready. You're sure? The transfer is legally void. I've got 3 independent attorneys who've reviewed it and agree. I've got June's photographs. I've got the hospital's documentation of your recovery date. I've got the trust documents for the lake house." And he paused. "I found something else." "What kind of something else?" "The kind that means Norma and Douglas don't just lose your house, Ray. The kind that means they lose considerably more than that." The heron at the far bank lifted off suddenly, wings wide, cutting clean across the darkening sky. I watched it go. "Tell me everything," I said. And Spencer told me, and by the time he finished, the sun was completely gone. The lake was black and still and perfect, and I was smiling for the first time in 6 weeks. Not because I was cruel, not because I wanted pain for anyone, but because there is a specific, irreplaceable satisfaction, available only to the patient that comes from watching a trap you built with your own hands finally click shut. They were sitting in my living room under Norma's beige curtains, completely at ease, completely certain they had won. They had absolutely no idea that 6 weeks ago, the moment I opened my eyes in that hospital room, I had already won. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. Real revenge, the kind that actually means something, doesn't look like screaming. It doesn't look like showing up at someone's door red-faced and shaking with a list of grievances. It doesn't look like a scene. Real revenge looks like a Tuesday morning, quiet, unhurried, dressed in a good shirt. It was a Tuesday morning when Spencer filed. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the lake house, eating scrambled eggs, when he called to confirm it was done. The legal challenge to the property transfer had been officially submitted to the county courthouse. The documentation was airtight. The expired power of attorney. The hospital records confirming my recovery date. June's time-stamped photographs. 3 independent legal opinions. And 1 additional piece of information that Spencer had uncovered that I still hadn't fully processed without feeling something cold move through my chest. But I'll get to that. It's filed, Spencer said. How long before they're served? 48 hours? Maybe less. I ate a forkful of eggs. How do you think Norma is going to take it? Spencer laughed. Actually laughed, which, if you knew Spencer, was a rare and precious event. Like a woman who just discovered the ground she's been standing on was never hers to begin with, he said. I thanked him, hung up, and finished my breakfast. 41 hours later, June called me. She didn't even say hello. Raymond, a man in a suit, just knocked on your door and handed Norma an envelope. What did she do? She opened it on the porch, read it, and then she made a face like she'd bitten directly into a lemon with her whole soul. I'm just describing what I saw, Raymond. Did she go back inside? And about 4 minutes later, I could hear her through my living room window from 30 yards away. So I think the conversation inside was somewhat elevated in volume. Thank you, June. Thank me properly when it's done, she said, and hung up. Now, here's where I need to slow down, because what happened over the next 72 hours wasn't just legal maneuvering, it was personal. And the personal part is the part that stays with you long after the paperwork is settled. Lindsay called me that same evening. I looked at her name on my phone screen for 4 full rings. Then I answered. Dad? Her voice was different. The rehearsed tightness was gone. What replaced it was something raw and harder to listen to, because it sounded like my daughter again, the real one, the one from before all of this. Lindsay, Dad, we received papers today, and I need to understand what's happening. I think the papers explain it fairly clearly. You're challenging the transfer. I am. A long pause. Dad, we did what we thought was right. The hospital bills, the costs, it was overwhelming. And Brett's parents offered to help, and the attorney said, What attorney, Lindsay? What attorney told you that transferring my house was a legitimate solution to hospital bills? I asked. Calm, steady, because I'd very much like to know who gave you that advice. Was it a family attorney, an independent one, or was it someone Norma already had on retainer? The silence this time was longer and heavier. Dad, I'm not asking to be cruel, I said. I'm asking because I think somewhere between the moment I went into that coma and the moment you walked into my hospital room with that rehearsed look on your face, something happened to my daughter that had nothing to do with my hospital bills. I heard her breath catch. I need you to think hard, Lindsay, not about Brett, not about Norma, about yourself. About whether any part of this felt right to you at any point, because I know you and I don't believe it did. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, Her voice was very small. "It happened so fast, Dad. They were there every day, and I was scared. And they kept saying it was the responsible thing and that you would understand and that it was just paperwork. And here's the thing. Here's the absolute truth of it. I believed her. Not because I wanted to, not because it was easy, but because I knew my daughter. And what I heard in her voice wasn't the guilt of someone who had schemed. It was the guilt of someone who had been guided careful step by people far more calculating than she was, into doing something she could never fully undo. That didn't erase it. I want to be clear about that. Love doesn't erase things. It just decides what to do with them. We'll talk, I told her. When this is over, you and me, we'll talk. She was crying now. Okay. She managed. Lindsay? Yeah? Watch how she responds to all of this. And then ask yourself honestly who that woman has been to you since the moment you married her son. I hung up and I sat in the quiet of the lake house for a while, watching the lake through the window, feeling the specific exhaustion of a man who loves someone and is angry at them at the same time and has to find a way to carry both things without letting either one destroy him. Now, Spencer's additional discovery. I've been building to this, and I won't delay it any longer. While pulling records related to my property transfer, Spencer had run a broader search on Douglas and Norma's standard due diligence for litigation. What he found had nothing to do with my house. What he found was a pattern. 7 years ago, Douglas and Norma had lived in Maricopa County, Arizona. They had an elderly neighbor, a widower named Howard, whose son had married a young woman with very close ties to Norma's church circle. Howard had suffered a stroke, and while Howard was incapacitated, a power of attorney held by that young woman had been used to transfer Howard's property into a holding LLC with Douglas's name quietly attached. Howard never got his house back. He died in a care facility 2 years later. The case had been investigated but never prosecuted, insufficient evidence at the time. The family had moved. Life moved on until Spencer found it. "This isn't just your case anymore, Ray," he told me, when we sat down together at his office 2 days before the hearing. "What we have here is a pattern of behavior, a methodology. Your situation wasn't an accident or a family making bad decisions under pressure. This was something they've done before, something they're apparently comfortable doing." I sat across from him in that familiar old office, and I thought about Howard, a man I'd never met, a widower who had something built and loved and earned and lost it to people who smiled and brought casseroles and measured your rooms while you weren't looking. What can we do with it? In terms of your property case, it establishes motive and prior conduct. It significantly strengthens your position before the judge. Spencer folded his hands. In terms of what Howard's family might want to do with it, that's not our decision. But I did locate his daughter. She's in Portland. I thought you might want to know that. I thought about it for all of 3 seconds. "Send her what you found," I said. "She deserves to know." The hearing was set for a Thursday morning. I wore a gray suit, nothing dramatic, nothing expensive, just clean and pressed and exactly right. Spencer and I arrived early. We sat at the plaintiff's table, and about 12 minutes later, Norma and Douglas walked in with their attorney, a tall man with very confident shoes, who clearly hadn't yet been told how thoroughly outgunned he was. Norma saw me the moment she walked through the door, and I want to tell you what happened to her face in that moment. She'd been composed, the casserole smile, the straight shoulders, the performance of a woman who was certain of her position, and then she saw me sitting there in my gray suit and she understood, perhaps for the first time, that the man she'd reduced to a hospital bed and a piece of paperwork had not stayed reduced. The smile didn't fall dramatically. It didn't crumble. It just stopped. Like a light switching off. Douglas looked at his shoes. Brett, who had come despite everything, probably because Norma needed witnesses, sat in the gallery and could not bring himself to look at me at all, which told me everything I needed to know about how much he genuinely understood what his parents had done. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Patricia Wren, 50s, silver reading glasses, the expression of someone who had heard every variety of human foolishness this world produces, and remained unimpressed by all of it. She reviewed Spencer's filing. She reviewed the opposing response. She asked 3 clarifying questions, and received 3 increasingly uncomfortable answers from the man with the confident shoes. Then she looked up. "The power of attorney presented in this transfer," she said, "expired upon the plaintiff's documented recovery of legal capacity. The transfer executed after that date was unauthorized. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. 7 sentences. 7 sentences, and 27 years of my life came back to me." Norma's attorney was already leaning over, whispering. Douglas had gone very still. Norma herself sat perfectly upright, and I watched her deploy the last defense available to a person who has run out of every other option. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and arranged her face into an expression of dignified injustice, as if she were the wronged party, as if she were the one who had been in a coma. Outside the courtroom in the marble corridor afterward, it happened. Spencer was speaking with the clerk. I was standing by the window, jacket button undone, coffee from the hallway machine in hand. Terrible coffee, but I'd earned it when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Norma, alone, without Douglas, without the attorney, without the performance, just a woman in her 60s who had just watched her plan dismantle in a courtroom and had apparently decided she had something to say. She looked at me for a moment, and I looked back at her. "You didn't have to do this the way you did," she said quietly. "You could have come to us. We could have talked." I tilted my head slightly. "Like Howard?" I said. "Did Howard get to come to you and talk?" Her face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "I don't know what you think you know." "Norma," I said her name the way you say a period at the end of a sentence. "I know enough. And so does Howard's daughter now." The dignified injustice left her face completely after that. What replaced it? I'm not going to call it guilt, because I'm not sure Norma was capable of guilt in the traditional sense. What replaced it was something more primal, the look of someone who has always operated in the shadows, and just felt a light come on. She walked away without another word, and I turned back to the window. I moved back into the Delwood Avenue house on a Saturday. June was on her porch when I pulled up. She stood, walked to the edge of her yard, and watched me get out of the car. I walked over and hugged her properly. She patted my back twice, which for June was the emotional equivalent of a standing ovation. "The curtains," she said as I pulled back. "I'll get them today." "Good," she said firmly, and went back to her roses. The house smelled like someone else when I walked in. Strange candles, different soap. The particular scent of people who had occupied a space that wasn't built for them. I opened every window, and then I stood in the middle of my living room, the room with my crown molding, my hardwood floors, my 34 years of Saturday afternoons, and I just breathed. I called Spencer. "I'm in. How does it feel?" I looked at the ceiling, at the molding I'd cut and fitted and painted by hand on a long weekend in 2003 when Lindsay was 13, and had helped me by handing up pieces and asking approximately 9,000 questions about why any of it mattered. "It feels like mine," I said. Lindsay came over 3 weeks later. No green jacket this time, just my daughter. Tired around the eyes in the way people get when they've spent a lot of time looking at themselves honestly and not entirely liking what they've seen. She brought food. Not a casserole, thankfully. A rotisserie chicken and a bag of groceries. And the particular energy of someone who has rehearsed an apology so many times they've stopped knowing where the rehearsal ends and the real thing begins. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table and we ate for a while. Neither of us said anything about any of it. Then she said, "Brett and I are in counseling." "Good. I don't know where things are going." "That's okay." She picked at a piece of chicken. "I keep thinking about what you said about watching Norma, about asking myself who she'd been to me." She paused. "Dad, I think I've been really scared of her for a long time and told myself it was love. 61 years old. A man who built things and lost things and rebuilt things and nearly died and came back and won back what was his. And across from me was my kid, 33 years old, figuring out the same hard lessons 30 years later. The way every generation does." I reached over and put my hand over hers. "I know," I said. She didn't cry. She just nodded once. The way adults nod when they've decided to keep going. We ate the rest of the chicken. And the lake house? Oh, the lake house is beautiful. I rent it out now, weekends mostly. Families on summer holidays. Couples in the fall when the leaves come down and the lake goes glassy and the mornings are cold enough to use the stone fireplace. The income is steady and entirely none of anyone else's business. But every few weeks, on a Sunday usually, I drive out there alone. I make coffee. I sit in one of those Adirondack chairs on the dock. I watch the heron that has apparently decided that stretch of bank is his permanent residence. And I respect his commitment. And I think about what Spencer said to me the day we filed. He said, "Ray, the most dangerous person in any situation is the one they forgot to finish off." I think about that a lot, because here's the thing about being a man who builds houses. You understand in your bones, in a way that can't fully be explained to someone who hasn't held the tools, that what looks finished on the outside still has a structure underneath beams and joints, and load-bearing walls that the eye never sees but that everything depends on. They looked at me and saw a man in a hospital bed, helpless, finished. They never thought to ask what was holding me up underneath. They never thought to ask what I'd built in the quiet. And that right there was their only mistake. But it was the one that mattered. My name is Raymond Holt. I built things my whole life. And the most important thing I ever built was the patience to wait until the moment was exactly right. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.